to We the People. A right to dissent, a right to oppose, a right to resist, a right to protest, a right to expression. But do you have a right to be offended? Today on We the People, we're asking, have we gone from being the argumentative Indian to being the overly sensitive one? Have we arrived at a point where Indians do not in fact possess a right to free speech? Salman Rushdie's novel, The Satanic Verses, was banned by Rajiv Gandhi's government because it contained passages that were offensive to some Muslims. M.F. Hussain, one of our greatest artists, had to flee the country because his paintings offended some Hindus. Now, all over the world, the right to free expression is subject to reasonable restrictions. But have India's myriad restrictions crossed the threshold of reasonableness? This week, members of the Rajput Sena, a self-styled group that says it represents the Rajput community, disrupted the filming of Sanjay Leela Bhansali's Padmavati and physically assaulted the Padma Award-winning director on the grounds that they disagreed with his interpretation of the story of Rani Padmini. In the same week, a Muslim group protested against the author Taslima Nasreen's presence at the Jaipur Literature Festival and demanded that she never be invited there again. So what we're asking today is, do you have a right not to have your feelings hurt? And if we allow this, is there going to be any space left for freedom of expression? And joining us today to discuss this, we have from the BJP, Mr. Tarun Vijay. We have from the Congress, Mr. Tom Vadakan. Professor Mridula Mukherjee, who's a professor and historian. We have Dr. Sarahindu Mukherjee, who's also a professor, and he is a member of the ICHR, that is the Indian Council of Historical Research. We have Akhil Sibal, who's joining us, Supreme Court lawyer, also the counsel for the noted painter M.F. Hussain, who was hounded out of India for his paintings and died in exile. Rana Ayub, award-winning investigative journalist, political writer. Dr. Rakesh Sinha, director of the RSS think tank, that is the India Policy Foundation. Siddharth Roy Kapoor, president of the Film and Television Producers Guild of India, and Professor R.S. Khangarov. He's a historian at the Agarwal College in Jaipur, and we tried to get a member of the Karni Sena on the show, but they declined. The reason they've declined is that they are having a Bollywood night that coincides with the shooting of the show. So Bollywood, they may beat you up if you hurt their feelings, but don't worry, they love your movies just as much as the rest of us. All right, let's start with Professor Mridula Mukherjee. Professor, you know, the Karni Sena claims that they were forced to do what they did because the filmmakers have misrepresented history. Is this even history in the first place?
I mean, the Padmavat, which is actually a kind of a ballad written by Jassi in the 16th century, somewhere around the 1550s, about 240 years after the reign of Alauddin Khilji. Well, the consensus among historians is that this is not a chronicle of history at all. It is a story that an imaginative writer wrote about a certain historical period. The actual historical record that we have, unfortunately, is much more prosaic, as usually history is. Fiction is more exciting. And there is no mention of a love story. In fact, Amir Khusro, he accompanied the armies, in fact, does not mention this at all. If there was such a story, if there was such historical fact, it would be very surprising if this did not find any mention in contemporary records. So all that we are doing is we are taking a story written 2.5 centuries later, imagining it is history, and then getting excited about a wrong depiction of history. If the filmmakers claim that this is history, I would certainly object.
Okay.
I would still not go and beat them up. I think one needs to make a distinction, because there is a space for making films based on history, claiming they are historical. There's the Gandhi film. Recently, we had a film on Mandela. We've got films on Subhash Bose. Mughal-e-Azam is not a historical film. There is no record of any such great romance between Salim and Anarkali. But it's a nice, lovely story. People loved the dances and the music and enjoyed it. And nobody said, why have you exaggerated some minor incident?
But do a lot of kids today actually believe that story? Yeah. We don't know. Let's go across to Professor Khangarov. Professor, most historians agree there is no concrete contemporary evidence to prove the existence of Rani Padmavati, Rani Padmini. So is the Karni Sena basically just trying to get its 15 minutes of fame, which is what the Producers and Actors Guild of Bollywood says?
She mentioned about Amir Khusro being the eyewitness for the Chittor siege.
Correct.
Amir Khusro has omitted so many things. He was focused only on the incident of the Chittor siege, and he is writing when Alauddin Khilji with his troops went into the fort, 30,000 Hindus were massacred.
But the
He
fact
was
is, you don't
focusing-
have any factual proof then, even if he
But
didn't write about it, and he's a chronicler.
Let me tell you, Amir Khusro has omitted so many things. Alauddin Khilji murdered his uncle Jalaluddin. He has omitted that. Alauddin Khilji was defeated by the Mongols. He had omitted this. So you can't say that Amir Khusro has not written, that's why this becomes wrong. A.L. Srivastav says that Jaisi took the plot from somewhere and it was Amir Khusro's
230
work.
years later.
Yes, why not? It has to have its historical background. Then this got into the folklore, and the folklore of Mewar became so popular, and folklore is a very important historical evidence. And then there are these archaeological evidences. There is a Padmini ka Mahal in Chittor fort. Where did this come from?
All right.
Then
All
there
right.
is a Gora
All right.
Badal
All right. Well,
Mahal.
maybe there is some truth to this alternative facts. Kellyanne Conway certainly will find an ally in you, sir. But the fact is, whether it's true or not, whether it's history, is violence the answer? Let's go across to Tom Vadakan. Tom, your party struck one of the hardest blows to freedom of expression when you banned the satanic verses. Ever since then, every time a Hindu right-wing group attacks freedom of expression, the first thing they will say, and perhaps rightly so, is that you always object if something is said that is objectionable about Islam, but Hinduism is a punching bag and it's a free-for-all. Have you pushed us down a slippery slope?
Well, to begin with, two wrongs don't make a right. What happened in that context, I'm not here to defend. But let me tell you something. I've been a member of the censor board and the appellate board of the film of the INB ministry. We had variety of films that came in, including I personally was written against by the then leader of the opposition and our present finance minister. He wrote half a page saying that we messed around with Rajniti, but the only thing, Sharmila Tagore was the chairman and I was holding fort because she was travelling abroad. We were in the meeting but did nothing, did not touch it with a barge pole, except for a reference on the election commission that the EVM machines.
But historically, let's look at what happened during
No,
the
no,
emergency. Two films, Andhi and
point I'm
Kissa
trying to make
Kursika
is-
in 1977, Andhi in 1975, both banned by the Congress government during and after the emergency.
That's what exactly I started in the beginning, that two wrongs don't make a right, and that's exactly what I'm maintaining. There is a process in the government of India. You have a problem, please approach the censor board. You have not seen the script or the storyboard. In the days to come, you will have a situation that you have to get clearances from these fringe elements before you write the story.
But some filmmakers have problems even with censor boards. We don't
no,
know
just a
if
minute.
that will work in the
Censor
end.
board has a right to preview, then there's an appellate board, then there's a court.
Correct,
You
but that
don't
is
have
at
to
least
go
the
and
legal
bash
form,
up
the right
a
way of doing it.
filmmaker just because you think this is going to happen.
All right, Mr. Vijay, now how far can you take this notion of not hurting anybody's sentiments, right? Because in India today, everything is a holy cow. And going by this yardstick, let's say if a Sikh filmmaker wants to make a film on the 84 riots and wants to portray Rajiv Gandhi as the leader who ordered these riots, there's no factual evidence of that, though some Sikhs may believe that. But if that were the case, and the Congress protested saying that, you know, it hurts the sentiments of the lakhs of our workers, by the same yardstick, then that filmmaker should not be allowed to make that film.
No, you are giving a very wrong example.
Why? Explain.
It's not a question of not being hurt by anything. We have the greatest freedom of creativity in India, which is comparable to none in the world.
but
there is a collective memory which rests on the history. There is a collective memory which believes in the Virgin Mary. There is a collective memory which believes that the Hazrat Bal has got the hair of the Prophet. There is no certificate by any person. There is a collective memory which represents Padmini as an icon of India's soul and the bravery and sacrifices of the Indian women against the invasions of the Muslim invaders, because if Padmini was kept alive, she would have been sold in the markets of Afghanistan and Iran like Rani Tarabai.
But again, we're not sure this is history.
Just a minute. That is Padmini. Padmini is a collective memory of India. It's an icon of Rajasthan's valor and sacrifice. The womanhood who tried to save themselves from the assaults of the lust and the barbarity and the savagery of the Muslim invaders. This film, if it shows Padmini with Khilji in a different way will be taken as again dishonoring Padmini. It will be an assault on the Indian womanhood.
If that is the case, why don't we say, look, this is a myth. It may not be history, but it is close to our hearts. We feel very strongly about this. Padmini is an important part of the Indian imagination, just as, let's say, Ulysses of the Odyssey is to the West. But in the West, you have classical studies, you have cultural studies. Here, why are we saying, why instead of trying to prove that, let's say, plastic surgery or cars and planes existed in ancient India, why don't we just accept it's not history, but it's important to us? So as a filmmaker, why are you being insensitive to something that is so important to me culturally? Why don't you say that?
I'm sorry, you are very rude to the Indian ethos and the Indian scholarship.
That's what you feel. That is what you feel, but
when you are
answer the question,
citing
sir.
the example of plastic surgery, you are making fun of Sushrut and Charak. You are making fun of the entire tradition of the Indian medicine and the Indian surgeons that is on record. And for you, because you won't believe Hindis or Hinduwalas, you will believe on the British and the Goras. There is a great reservoir of British writers who have written about the plastic surgery, about Sushrut, about Charak, and about how the Indian medicine was at its pinnacle when there were no Cambridge and no Howard. So don't make fun of your own country's ethos. Number one. Number two, you say Ram is a myth, you say Krishna is a myth. Why would you like to impose your viceroy's vision on the Hindus alone and make Hindus as a subject of the secular laboratory reforms? Hindus will not allow this. So Padmini is a part of our history, and this collective memory makes us believe that, because otherwise there won't be any Padmini Mahal in Chittor, there won't be any Vijay Stamb in Chittor, there won't be any Khilji going to arrest Rana
and should
Rawal.
People not be allowed to make films? Before you even see the films, you block it.
It's not a matter of making film. Or can you make a wrong film on Guru Gobind Singh or Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib? Can you make a wrong film making mockery of Virgin Mary? If you cannot make a film on that, why should you even think to become a Alauddin Khilji of 2017 and dishonor
Which is the
Padmini?
first question
That is
I
my
asked
question.
Tom Vadakar.
I think that we have the greatest creative freedom in India, but a freedom cannot be absolute. You cannot make a film making a fun of Constitution or making a fun of Ambedkar or Gandhi. Can you? You will be arrested.
A freedom cannot be absolute. Let's go across to Akhil. Akhil, it has been a decade since Ahmed Hussain was forced to leave the country, and then since then we've let him die in exile. Are there laws in place that can protect the creativity of an artist today? What exactly does the Constitution say? It says that there should be reasonable restrictions, right? Freedom cannot be absolute, Mr. Vijay says. What do you mean by reasonable restrictions? This is a vague description, and it has been misused by political parties and by fringe groups. Who is to blame here? Do you think it's a political chicanery, or do you think it's weak laws?
Ultimately, the laws are in place. That's not the issue. The issue is really that you have this extra legal force which bullies, which intimidates, and which has no respect for freedom of expression. Ultimately, any commitment to freedom of expression must entail respect of a person's right to offend. Free speech is nothing if not the ability to offend, to challenge, to question, to alarm. What you can't do are at a very extreme end of the spectrum. Something like this, to my mind, is a no-brainer. But the issue is that the state doesn't step forward to protect.
Correct.
You have moral legitimacy given to all of this. If you ask somebody a point-blank question, every politician will say, oh yes, we're not advocating violence, we condemn violence, we don't say that you take law into your own hands. But when you have a minister in the central government, Giriraj Singh, coming out and saying on television that जनता माफ नहीं करेगी, जनता को सजा देनी चाहिए, अगर इतिहास से छेड़छाड़ करेंगे तो यही नतीजा होगा. If things like that are said, it provides an enabling environment. A bunch of goons enter premises, beat up people, destroy, hurl filthy abuses, and then the poor producer, director, cast, crew have to flee, and we are nicely discussing after the fact But the point is, what is the accountability? And ultimately, you have statements rather than the state coming forward and saying, this is unacceptable, even if it's offensive, even if you don't like it, we will not tolerate this behavior. Unless the state comes forward, you're going to have a situation where at the point of creativity, artists, filmmakers, painters, writers are now thinking to themselves, wait a second, should I pre-censor?
Should I pre-censor? Let's put that question across to Siddharth Roy Kapoor. Siddharth, in your statement after this whole incident, you said that Bollywood has become a soft target. But you know what they say about schoolyard bullies? They say that they only pick on people who don't fight back. And as we've seen with Karan Johar and Ae Dil Hai Mushkil, as we've seen here with Padmavati, both the producers, the directors, they've come to an agreement with these bullies.
You know, the first thing I have to say to that really is that we need to get out of this entire cycle of blaming the victim. I think in this case, you know, in particular, there shouldn't really be any argument about what really the solution to this issue should have been. Everyone's discussing the historical accuracy or the historical inaccuracy of what is depicted in a film of which the script no one has read. Number one, no one really knows what this film is about. Number two, even if they did, is this the way to go about registering a protest? What you need to be doing is, the film has got to clear the CBFC first. You watch the film in a cinema. If you have a problem with it, register your case with the right authorities and let the law take its own course. I think we really have become a very soft target, and more so in this case in particular, it puts to light how starkly that has happened, because in this case, no one really knows what the film is about, but they've jumped on the bandwagon and ensured that they've gotten their 15 minutes of fame. I think to keep pointing a finger back at the industry for not being united, we are completely united on this. But as the gentleman who just spoke before me said, I think it's important for the state to take it upon itself to encourage us and discourage these elements from indulging in acts of this nature, and to make it a point to very openly come out and say that we are for freedom of expression. We keep talking about the Indian film industry being one of those industries in the world which has actually been able to maintain a local culture and a local idiom. I think it is going to be very unfortunate going forward if we indulge in self-censorship. I really do apprehend that if these things do continue, then, you know, unfortunately people will not be able to creatively express themselves as freely as they have been, which will lead to a decline in the creative output of the industry.
All right, Siddharth, you mentioned Hollywood, but compare the situation with Hollywood today, where we've seen at the SAG Awards, at other awards, small stars to big stars. Everybody has come out and spoken openly, and they're taking on no less than the President of the United States because their views don't agree with his. But on the other hand, in Bollywood, even though you claim you're united, few people who speak up, they only do so on Twitter, and they aren't really supported by everybody.
I think the discussion that we should be having is more about what is the state going to do about it.
You've answered that.
But
the question is, can Bollywood also respond differently to not be bullied by these vigilante groups?
And how would you suggest we do that?